Meredith, thank you very much for joining me in this conversation. What I'm hoping to do is pick your brain about the changing face of labor. Now, I know you go to a lot of accounts, you meet a lot of people, you train and you educate a lot of people in supply chain, warehouse management, and things like that. And so, what I'd like you to kind of just discuss with me is, what are you doing to help the Gen Y and Gen Z worker in the warehouse that you didn't have to do in the past? So before we start, Meredith, tell me a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do?
Sure. Well, my name is Meredith Levknecht, and I'm a senior consultant in the warehouse management space. I've been working in warehousing and logistics for about the last 15 years now. And I've worked in all different spaces, 3PL, healthcare distribution, retail. So it's all warehousing, but with a little bit different twist.
Okay. So tell me a little bit, first of all, the warehouse labor force. Talk to me a little bit about, during your career, how things have changed and how you relate to them and what you have to do, what their needs and expectations, how they've changed over time.
Sure. Well, I think when I entered the workforce, obviously, there was an older generation that had worked in warehousing. I think, traditionally, it had been, more male driven, and a lot of things were more based on paper. So now, as we've seen, kind of technology evolve over the last 10 to 15 years, what I've noticed in particular is you have this new generation coming in, and they're tech savvy. They're very intuitive. They learn more from a hands-on perspective, whereas the older generation was more process oriented, very objective to deviating from a process or changing a process. And the newer generation, I find, is exactly the opposite. They want hands-on training where they teach themselves things. They pick up things a lot more quickly, and they're a little bit more I guess flexible in that they're more willing to accept change. The dynamic that is interesting, though, is that when people retired, when I first entered the workforce, you didn't see them come back. Now we're seeing people staying in the workforce longer, working longer. And I don't know if it's, because healthcare has increased, people are living longer. People, generally speaking, they'll retire and they don't want to stay at home. They want something to do. So I'm still seeing an increase in a mix in older generations and newer generations, and it does cause some conflicts, I think, in the approach that we've had to take towards training and implementation.
Interesting. So you almost have to run two tracks.
Yes.
And so if you were going to describe these new labor employees, what is it that you do to try and draw them out? You involve them a lot more. You hand things to them and let them figure it out a lot more. Or are there any other things, specifics that you can think of that you're having to do with these people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the approach that we've taken to training is more hands-on. So when we introduce new concepts or new processes for the application, we try to actually I try to mock up what a simulation of a warehouse environment would be, or actually execute that training on the warehouse floor in light of operations. So we make sure that our handhelds are working for the training, people are interacting in the system. And I take an approach with the training where first I talk through a concept, and then I'll demonstrate the concept. And then the training approach that I take next is to have those users actually walk through those processes or features in tandem with me as I'm walking through examples. And that really helps to keep the group engaged. Otherwise, I find with these newer generations, if you're walking through a demonstration and they're not involved, you lose engagement very quick.
So we've talked about the things you have to be careful about. We've talked about the technology, the Gen Y and the Gen Z's technology checks out. Are there any other strengths that you've noticed that these modern generation workers bring to the warehouse?
Yeah, I think they're very, like I mentioned before, they're very flexible and they're very willing to, I guess, go above and beyond. So I think the technology aspect, they're a little bit more trusting of technology than I think older generations had been. So they work really well, I find, in these implementation projects and as a team, because they're more open to discussion or changes in the process. So I think, they are the generation that, if you're really trying to make your work operation efficient, you can try different things with them. Whereas I think sometimes older generations, based on their experience, they were concerned that there'd be elimination of jobs, or even just more work put on their plate. So this newer generation, they're more willing to try new processes, put forward ideas if something isn't working. So there's a better communication, a stronger communication channel there. And, I think that has helped create a more collaborative approach around implementations in general.
If you were standing in front of a warehouse manager or a director of supply chain or something like that, talking about the modern warehouse worker, the new generation of warehouse workers, what one piece of advice would you give them, other than these guys are great for adapting new things? What one piece of advice would you give them to allow them to get the most they could possibly get out of these people, while at the same time valuing their contribution? What is it that you would say to them that they should do to get the most out of these workers?
I think it's important when new workers come in, especially as we see an increase in temp workers, to establish a strong baseline. So, I mean, for me, it always comes back to training. Once this new generation is trained, they're very confident and they can quickly adapt to exception processes if they know how to leverage the system, and a baseline process. So I think there's definitely a strong emphasis, at first for the onboarding, to make sure that there's a strong training program in place, not only to train the employees, but then a mechanism to assess them and to see where there are areas that they might need, additional help or attention just based on how they're interpreting some of the information. So I think once you do that, this new generation is really ready to hit the road. I mean, they can take off running and they can kind of, I guess, self-navigate after that with, minimized needed input from like a supervisor.
Thank you very much, Meredith. That was great. Really, really insightful. So we've been talking to Meredith Levknecht. She is a senior consultant at Texas, and hopefully you've learned a little bit more about how to work with your current labor force, the new labor force in the warehouse. And there is a lot more content around this topic and all other kinds of supply chain topics in the Texas Resources Library. And hopefully if you poke around in there, you'll find some other stuff that is of value to you. I'm Bill Denby. I'm with Texas, and thank you very much for your time.